Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Springfield Three. Sherill Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall disappeared from Levitt and Streeter's home at 1717 Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, sometime on the morning of June 7, 1992. What happened to them? Springfield Police Captain Tony Glenn said of the house, "The only thing unusual about this house was that 3 women were missing from it. You had this feeling as you looked around that something was missing, that something has to be missing. But there wasn't, just them." Sherill Levitt was 47 at the time of her disappearance. She was 5 feet tall and weighed 110 pounds. She had brown eyes and short, bleach blonde, curly hair. She was a cosmetologist born on November 1st, 1944. Sherill's daughter, Suzanne Streeter, was 19. She was 102 pounds, with brown eyes and straight, shoulder-length, bleach blonde hair. She had a scar on the top of her right forearm and a small tumor at the left corner of her mouth. She had large teeth and had had no dental work. She was born on March 9th, 1973. Stacy McCall was Suzanne Streeter's friend and was 18 at the time of her disappearance. She was 120 pounds with blue eyes and dark blonde, medium-length hair. She had freckles and a dimple in the middle of her chin. She was born on April 23, 1974. On June 6th, the night before the disappearances, Streeter and McCall had just graduated from Kickapoo High School in Springfield. They were celebrating their graduations by attending graduation parties. After celebrating, the pair decided to stay the night at Streeter's home. They drove separately to get there. They were last seen around 2:15 a.m. on June 7th. It's clear from the investigation that the two had gotten ready for bed before they disappeared. There was jewelry left in the bathroom along with damp cloths, possibly used to remove makeup. McCall's shorts had been folded and were sitting atop her shoes. Left behind were purses belonging to all 3 women, cars, keys, cigarettes, and the family dog. Sherill Levitt was last heard from by a friend around 11:15 p.m. on June 6th. Her bed appeared slept in, and all of her personal belongings were left behind. The items left behind, along with the last sightings, leave police to believe that the 3 women were abducted sometime between 2:15 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. on June 7th. On the morning of June 7th, Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, tried to reach her daughter. When she couldn't, she drove to the home at 1717 Delmar Street, where she discovered a shattered porch light, the unlocked front door, and the women nowhere to be found. She called the authorities immediately. In 2017, Janice did an interview with KY3 in which she said that she had expected Stacy home that night or possibly within a few days. She said that she never thought it would be 25 years later and she'd still be saying Stacy was missing. By the time law enforcement arrived, the home had been trampled through by 18 of the missing women's friends and family members. Upon arrival, the police noted that the porch light globe had been shattered, but it had already been swept up. The broken porch light globe was the only sign of a struggle in the home. They also noted that the front door had been left unlocked. The early investigation into missing persons report number 920169 seemed to be going along well. Sergeant Mark Webb said that in the beginning he had every hope they would solve the case within a few days. He expected that they'd find the women and know what happened quickly. That, however, was not the case. The investigation wasn't handled as standard from the very beginning. More information than normal was released, including allowing the media to videotape polygraph tests of suspects. They were also allowed to print tips that came in, and almost every detail from the house itself, including how the rooms looked. Within a week of the disappearance, the television show America's Most Wanted had aired a story on the case. It got so out of hand that then prosecutor Tom Mountjoy had to write a letter to the chief of police saying information had to be kept quiet in order to not jeopardize holding any perpetrators legally accountable. The sharing of information could have caused problems with the prosecution. In the first days, investigators had three major theories. The first was that Sherill was the target. She was the only one who was expected to have been home that night. The second theory was that Suzanne was the target. She was known to have hung out with a troubled crowd. The third theory was that the crime was random. A sadist driving around looking for victims may have come across the three. Police say it would have been easy for one person with a gun to have subdued the women. An FBI profiler agreed that it was likely only one person committed the crime. Investigators say that the kidnapper needed a large vehicle, possibly a van, to transport the three women. In fact, a tip had come in that someone saw a green van in the area that night. Investigators also believe the perpetrator was familiar with the area. Early on in the investigation, a reward for $43,000 was put up for the location and prosecution of the perpetrators. Some investigators believe that the three were buried in Mark Twain National Forest. Some others believe that the three were disposed of on a pig farm in Webster County. This tip came from a member of a motorcycle gang. The farm owner was a convicted murderer, so this seemed plausible to the police, and in 1993 the farm was searched. No evidence was found. Early on, investigators conducted some polygraph tests on people they believed may have been involved. Streeter's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Rekla, Streeter's brother and Levitt's son, Bart Streeter, who was estranged from the family, were both tested. Initially, the police suspected Robert Craig Cox of committing the abduction. Cox had been convicted of killing a woman in Florida. At the time of the three women's disappearances, Cox's conviction had been overturned and he was living in Springfield, Missouri. Cox didn't cooperate with police. In fact, he played with them. Police discovered his alibi was a lie. He had said he was at church with his girlfriend at the time the women disappeared. His girlfriend corroborated this alibi, but she later admitted to a grand jury that she had lied to investigators because Cox had asked her to. At one point, Cox told police that he knew the women were dead. Robert Craig Cox pled guilty to kidnap and assault in California and served 9 years in prison. He was later convicted of murdering a woman named Sharon Zeller in Orlando, Florida. He was sentenced to death for this crime, but his conviction was overturned due to a lack of evidence. Then Cox moved to Springfield, Missouri. In the weeks after the disappearance of the Springfield Three, Cox's girlfriend provided the alibi that the two were together when the women disappeared, which she later confessed was a lie. In 1996, Cox was in a Texas prison. KY3 investigative reporter Dennis Graves went to interview Cox. Cox told Graves, "I know they are dead. I'll say that, and I know that." Graves asked if this was not just a theory, to which Cox replied, "I just know that they are dead. That's not my theory. I just know that. There's no doubt about that." This interview was subpoenaed by law enforcement and was presented to a grand jury, but no charges were handed down against Cox. Cox is currently serving a life sentence in Texas for robbery. He will be eligible for parole in 2025. Sergeant Mike Owens said of Cox, "All our eggs are not in Cox's basket. We're still looking at lots of different people. If tomorrow we had a lead and solved this case and it wasn't Cox, I wouldn't be surprised." On the 5-year anniversary of the disappearances, the police declared that they could no longer justify the money and manpower spent on the case, and it was closed. Tips that came in were still followed up on, though. In 2001, the case was reopened. In 2002, investigators went to a concrete company in Webster County to search a van. Cadaver dogs were used and bones were found, but those bones were too old to belong to the 3 women. In April of 2003, law enforcement dug up farmland in Cassville. They found 2 pieces of potential evidence: possible blood and part of a green vehicle. Testing on the blood was inconclusive. In 2001, a local writer hired a consulting engineer to do ground-penetrating radar in a parking garage. They found 3 anomalies. The police didn't follow up. In February of 2019, Bart Streeter was arrested on suspicion of public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and attempted false imprisonment in Tennessee. At this time, he was investigated and eliminated as a suspect in the disappearance of the Springfield 3. The family of Sherill Levitt and Suzanne Streeter have had them declared dead. Janice McCall refuses to have Stacy declared dead. She said, "Until I know 100% that Stacy is deceased, I will never declare her dead. They're going to have to find some remains somewhere before I call her legally dead. It's not for any reason other than if I do and she's not dead, think of how mad she'd be when she gets back." Anyone with information is asked to call the Springfield Police Department or FBI VICAP. What happened to the Springfield 3? Were they abducted, or did they run away? Was Robert Craig Cox involved? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.